Welcome to the Ghost Show online, my fiends, booze, and ghouls. Your hosts, Seika Groves, Rachel Benter, and Ian Russell will discuss all things paranormal. Prepare to be afraid.
The Boleskine house. Yay!
It's going to be good.
So, what is, who is, where is the Boleskine house? Actually, it's a really, really very cool place. It is in the Highlands of Scotland in a little parish known as Boleskine. And the property, the house, as most people may or may not know of it, if you've ever heard of it, we're going to get to sort of that infamous side of it. It is sitting up on the hillside overlooking Loch Ness. It's got phenomenal views of the loch. It's absolutely stunning. And it was constructed in, I believe, 1760 by Alexander Campbell Fraser. So that's kind of the little history snippet behind it. And the other interesting thing is, for everybody out there, is that I was lucky enough to, in a series of very strange circumstances and connections, end up as part of the Boleskine House Foundation. So I am their historical content creator. And that means that I'm in charge of looking into the real history of the property and bringing that to life. So we're going to start talking about the house. So Ian, you did a little digging around.
Mm-hmm.
What did you find? I'm really curious to see what you found. I think I know what you found, but
yeah, what I really find interesting in the history of the property is that it was once owned by Aleister Crowley.
Right. And everybody's interested in the ownership of Aleister Crowley, except me.
Well, just
it's not that I'm disinterested. It's just that it really is such a tiny part of the house.
Yeah, well, he didn't own it very long. It was only 20 years or so,
years,
I think.
About 11 years. Yeah.
Oh,
he
was
bought
it even?
In 1899, and he sold it in 1913, I believe. Yeah.
But that's sort of my interest that I sort of stumbled across just with my work within the paranormal field. Right. And anybody who's within the paranormal knows who Aleister Crowley was.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's an interesting thing, right? Is that I say, the history and mystery surrounding the Boleskine house. There's an infamy there because of Crowley, right? But like I said, he's really a very small part of the house's history. The house is very old, being built in 1750. I mean, it's going on now to be, 240 years old and then some. So, 12 years or so of that amount of time is really minuscule, right? The other sort of infamous or famous owner of the property was Jimmy Page.
Jimmy Page, right.
Yeah, he purchased it in 1970 and he owned it until 1992. Now, this is where this whole story gets really crazy. As I said before we went live, I had been writing an article for the foundations. They have a journal that they put out. It's much like a magazine, and it goes out to sort of upper echelon members that belong to the Boleskine House Foundation. And before we go any further, I just want to talk about that a little bit. Not to rah, but, maybe to rah a little bit, because they're doing great things. It's a newly formed foundation. The home is owned by a new owner. And he purchased the property in April of 2019. with the intent of restoring the property back to, I won't say back to 1760, but at least back to a representation of a number of centuries in which the house has survived. And so the idea was to bring the facade back to the original, right, to what it would have looked like at that time period, or at least in the late 1700s. And then from there, kind of move through the property in various ways, including some of the Victorian elements and some of the Georgian elements, and then some of the more modern elements as well. And of course, in restoring a property now, you can't really go back to 1760 because there was no hydro, there was no running water, there was none of those things.
Right.
And when you're doing a restoration project now, everything still has to meet code. It has to
correct. Yeah.
code. So there is that. Right. And there has been some chatter on, some forums and that it's like, oh, it's not really going to be historical because you can't. And the idea here is that they're not trying to make it historical. They're restoring the heritage. And the heritage is not the same thing as the historical, right? So heritage retains certain features, but we know under heritage, even here in Ontario, that you still have to meet modern expectations in terms of things like utilities in the home, fire prevention, all of those kinds of things. So
now, once the building is restored, what is the plan?
For
the building? Is it going to become like a tourist destination, or they're going to turn it into a hotel, or?
It will not be a hotel. So what it will be is a community space. So the idea is that tourists will indeed be able to come, they will be able to tour, they will be able to go around the grounds. The property itself still retains 22 acres. Originally it was 100. And it still retains 22 of those original acres. The property is lush. They're going to install a beautiful butterfly and bee garden into the estate. So it'll be beautiful with wildflowers and natural wildlife, which there is an abundance of. Let's just say that all around this home is still quite a rugged rock hillside and a lot of pine. So we still have a lot of really gorgeous features around this home. There's also a family cemetery on the site. Now there's a roadway going between it today because we have a major roadway that runs between the property and where the cemetery is, but the cemetery was originally on the shores of Loch Ness. It's still there. So when I say the shores, it's not literally right on the water, but it's overlooking that gorgeous view of the loch. So it's just got all of these gorgeous features. And then what they want to do is they're hoping that next to the property on an additional 5 acres, they want to build geo cottages. So cottages that are self-contained, that do not need outside hydro or anything, but small cottages built into the sort of the facade of the hillside so that they're not glaringly standing out and looking hideous, that people can come and stay in and then spend time on the property. It will be available for yoga retreats, weddings, workshops, tours, all kinds of fantastic things. So the idea is that they want to really open it up to the community around them. Instead of sequestering the home, making it private or turning it into a B&B or some sort of thing like that, they really want the community to be able to come back to the property and utilize it. So I think that that's a fantastic sort of forward-thinking way of handling this property that will help to remove some of the stigma that's attached to it. Because unfortunately, locally, the home has a number of people that are not fans, let's just say. Right? So we're working really hard and to work with the community, right? And that's my job, is to make sure that the house is represented in the best possible light. So we're not hiding anything. We're not hiding the fact that Aleister Crowley was there. We're not hiding the fact that Jimmy Page purchased the property because Aleister Crowley owned the property. What we're doing is we are showing all of the property, everything about it, from the time that it was built by Fraser to the time that it is now. You discovered all these things about Aleister Crowley. So let's talk about that, right? Because it's, again, when you go on the forums out there, that is for the most part what people mention, that the house was, owned by Crowley, and that he went there to perform magic rituals and to.
He was an occultist. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm on sort of two sides of the fence over that. Of course, we know who Crowley was on the one side. We know him as the occultist. We know him as, Thelema and all of these other sort of things that he brought to the forefront. He spent time with Madame Blavatsky, who we've spoken about before on the program, right? And he spent time with the Golden Dawn and a number of other organizations. So, and he founded his own OTO organization, right? So,
yeah.
So we have all of these things that Crowley was doing. But, and I'm kind of that's only one side of Crowley, right? That's not the other side of Crowley. The other side of Crowley is equally as interesting. He was a spoiled rich kid, right? He grew up in a family with wealth. He really never had to do much of anything in his life. He didn't have to go out to work or do all of these things. So he was one of those people in the 1800s in the Victorian era that had the ability to travel on a whim. And he climbed Everest. He was a mountaineer, right?
Oh, really?
He climbed,
that I did not know.
Yeah, he climbed Everest. He spent time in Mexico with the Order of the Golden Dawn. He was in New York City right around the time of the First World War, stirring the pot of political activism. There was a lot of things that he was doing, and there is some very interesting proof that he may have operated as a spy for British intelligence.
Huh.
So, was his occult something that he truly was part of him? I think it was, but I also think that some of it gave him an opportunity to get into some of these organizations where there were certain people that were doing things that, shouldn't have been happening, like funding the Nazi Party and all of these other things. And if he truly was, this British intelligence spy, how cool would that make him? Really? I mean, It goes beyond just the occult status. It really makes
sure.
a much more rounded person, but one who I think that we have to look at in a more respected light, perhaps. I think he gets a lot of bashing from people because they see him as this sort of, older in his life. I think, the picture of him like this with the pyramid on his head, people look at him like he was some crazy person, and he was highly intelligent and
well, he was also an author and a poet.
Yes. I mean, he was kind of if I think if Oscar Wilde could have gone on in his life, I believe he may have become a little bit more like Aleister Crowley. He just didn't have that opportunity. But there were hints even in Oscar Wilde's personality of, some of these things too, right? So there were a number of people moving in certain circles in that time that, would have rubbed shoulders and would have probably been highly interesting people to talk to. Crowley being one of them for sure, right? So we look at what happens with his persona. People don't look at him as a whole person. They look at him as this occult person. And then they look at him as some dark, sinister, evil, maniacal, Satanistic, sort of Satan worshiper. And really, when you understand those types of societies, or those types of followers, that's not really what it was about at all. It was really about thinking and philosophy and these things. And while there was an attachment to ritual and magic as we see it, I really don't honestly see magic in any different sense than, and I'm going to get in trouble for this from some people, but prayers are also incantations. And no matter what religion you follow, the end result is very much the same, right? When you're inciting, you are, speaking the words, you are looking for that energy to move out into the universe and find that destination that you've sent it to.
Right.
Whatever God it may be that you follow, whatever, whatever, right? So the problem here with Crowley's image is that people misunderstand his beliefs. They misunderstand what he was doing. And maybe even he misunderstood at some point his own power or his own ability of perhaps, how energy moves and how it moves through the constructs of time and the universe. And so, what energy did he leave behind at the house, right? But unfortunately, in the community around the house, this seems to be the problem, is that they believe that he worshipped Satan and he was a satanic person and that he brought bad things to the property. And I don't really believe that myself. I don't feel those energies from the property. I do know he was a part of it. But again, we have so many other people who are a part of that home, right? So while he left his energy stamp there, so did the Fraser clan, who had it for 150 years. Right? We have the stories of James Fraser, who lost his head in London. And did you read that story about the sound of the head thumping down the gallery hall?
Yep.
Yeah, because they believe that's his head.
Yep, I've heard the stories.
Ball, right? down the hall, the central hall of the home. So there are stories there. There are ghost stories around the house. There are numerous things. But the house was also a private residence. So after Crowley purchased it, he sold it to a private citizen. And they lived in that home for quite a number of years. And then the house was empty for a while. And then it became a hotel. And then it was, sort of passed on again. And this is where it gets really interesting. Because one of my relatives owned the home.
Oh, really?
I did not know this
Wow.
until I started digging. He is the person that sold it to Jimmy Page. Really weird kind of things. Now, Jimmy Page bought the property, but he never lived in it. And at the time he purchased it, it was already sort of beginning to be a little bit run down. It had a couple of issues, the roof and numerous other things. And so he bought it, and he never really moved in. He had a friend come in and look after the property pretty much the entire time. And the house fell into a pretty good state of disrepair at that point. And then it was sold, and Page sold it to a family from Holland, and they used it as their summer home. So they did some repairs, and they fixed a part of the roof, and they did a few things. And what happened was they went away, I guess, and shopping or some such as it goes, and the house caught fire.
And there was a fire. Yeah.
Right. And there was a fire. Now, it was contained to one area of the house at the time, but it did burn through the roof, and it did have a number of things. So they never really fixed it after that. And then the house sat empty and sort of again, derelict for some time. And then the new owner, who was traveling with his wife on vacation up there, saw that it was for sale and he purchased it. So, so then, the story sort of grows from there. Now,
there were actually 2 fires.
Yes. And
was there not?
Yes, there was. There's also a very old story that goes back to the Middle Ages that there was a kirk on the site. And a kirk is an old, we call them churches, right? Chapel.
Mm-hmm.
And that the rumor has it that somehow in the vicinity, I'm not exactly sure, and I have to do more digging in this because there's no written proof of this, so it's just a lot of compilation, but that all the parishioners burned inside the church. And so, the property was doomed from that point forward that, this happened. There was a kirk. It's now just sort of walls down in the chapel, but they say that there was a church on the hill at the site of where the home is. So with that big, long sort of tie-in, let's talk more about the cool stories, right? The ghost stories, the stories of Aleister Crowley. And, I should mention too, the song remains the same. The film,
mm-hmm.
Know this, but if you've seen it, there's a sequence where Jimmy Page is climbing that rock face to the top where the hermit is standing and looks down. And that's actually out the back of Boleskine.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that rock face, that mountain that he was climbing was literally on the property of Boleskine. And that was filmed about a year after he bought the property.
Oh,
so
very cool.
A bunch of cool sort of things that tie in. So let's talk about what kind of other ghost stories did you find or other interesting tales? What did you find about Aleister Crowley in the house? That's what I'm curious.
Just that he used the house as his foundation to conduct his
rituals.
His crazy rituals. Yeah.
How crazy were these rituals? I mean, I read about them. I don't know. I don't really find them all that crazy. Maybe that's me. But he was really trying to invoke angels.
For the time period, I think it was pretty nuts. Maybe not compared to today, but for that time period.
You think? Because the Victorian era had so many secret societies. And, we somehow give the Masons a pass, right? And they have some very interesting rituals. And yet, we seem to somehow allow the Masons a free pass in terms of what is considered the norm in a weird sort of way. Yet we talk about...
They're such a secret society, though, that...
Are they?
It's very difficult to actually find out, the stories of which I think have just gotten blown way out of perspective about what the Masons do compared to reality. I mean, you hear the stories of, the sacrifices and it's like, obviously that doesn't happen.
No, there really isn't. But at the end of the day, they do have some interesting history. And I actually have the full volumes of masonry from 1920s.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Yep. You can read all about every single thing that goes with from initiation to the 33rd level. Are all into the Victorian era had a lot of this going on. There was a lot of secret societies in the Victorian era. And so what Crowley was doing wasn't really that out there at the time. I know you might think it was, but the Victorian era was pretty out there. I mean, I spend a lot of my time teaching the darker side of the Victorian era, these secret societies, all of these things. And honestly, Crowley, I don't know. I think Crowley's persona blew up when Jimmy Page purchase the property. And,
because he was a huge fan.
Well, he was a huge fan, right? And I think that that's what really propelled Crowley into the 1970s. I think that for the most part, had Page and, all of these things with Zeppelin and everything, people were like, oh, it was Jimmy Page's fault because, and this and that. And they were blaming Aleister Crowley and all of these things. And I really believe that as interesting as Crowley was, if Page hadn't have purchased the property and hadn't had this public image, I'm not so sure Crowley would be as well known today as he is.
Makes sense. Yeah.
I think he would have been a bit like Madame Blavatsky or even Anton LaVey. How many people go around talking about Anton LaVey today? Hardly anyone, right? And LaVey was, really the first Satanist in terms of creating it as a religion.
Yeah.
So yeah, people want to wind back to Aleister, and poor Mr. Crowley gets all the right, all the people giving him a hard time. And to me, there needs to be more understanding. And this is how we make a difference with the property too, right? We get people to realize that he was a person and not a persona, right? That's kind of the thing. His persona supersedes his the actual person. And we know how that happens. Things just sort of blow up and stories happen. And then you got to try and find what's real and what's not. And it's like the great stories in terms of the ghosts that are on the property too, right? Like James Fraser's head rolling down the hallway. And people have heard this, right? People have heard this happen.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the fire. There's the other connection for me. The fire in 2019. So the gentleman who has the foundation, Keith, he purchased the home in April of 2019. The fire took place in July 31st, my birthday.
Oh, there you go.
How wacky is that?
Well,
right?
For sure. Yeah.
I've got relatives who own the place. I've got relatives who possibly were there when Fraser was there. I've got a fire on my birthday. That fire right now, I've read numerous stories about how it started. And I think that that's one of the things that right now we're really hoping is that people will understand is that this property is valuable in terms of its heritage. And not just because of who owned it, but because of the architecture and the location as well, right? This home was a beautiful, Georgian style hunting lodge with vaulted roofs inside and exposed beams and all of these things. And the funny thing is, and I want to reach out to people there who are Outlander fans, because while it's not shown in the television show, in the books, this property is actually mentioned because this is the hunting lodge, and James Fraser makes an appearance in Outlander on television, right? So we have a connection there that this property shows up in those stories as well because it was a real place, a real family, right? And I think that's the important thing about it. But we have these great stories like Fraser's head, rolling down the hall, or there's a story of a possible tunnel that leads from under the house to the cemetery.
To the cemetery, yeah.
Right? So we've got that story too. And there is certainly a vault under the old servants' quarters in the back of the home. There is an underground storage vault where you would have kept dry goods and things for cold storage, because in that time there were no refrigerators. So casks and barrels and things like that would have been kept down there, possibly cheese and things when, it was colder and it was below grade. So it would have been a good cold room for storage. Like I said, there's rumors about this tunnel. I'm really excited to be able to go to the property when it's ready.
Thank you for watching The Ghost Show Online. Join your hosts again next week as they discuss more tales of the supernatural, the paranormal, and all things spectacular. See you soon.